All right, Eagles. Today we're going to go over the Supreme Court Comparison FRQ. Remember, you have four writing pieces on the AP test: argumentative essay, quantitative analysis FRQ, concept application FRQ, and the SCOTUS comparison FRQ, or the Supreme Court case comparison FRQ. Now, the skill that they're going to be measuring this in this FRQ is: one, do you know your 15 Supreme Court cases? And number two, can you compare them to another case? So the content is knowing your cases, and the skill is being able to compare those cases to another case. So I like the SCOTUS comparison FRQ. I actually like it a lot. I think it's very fair. And the reason I think it's fair is because we know the 15 cases. I mean, they're giving us a list of 15, and as long as we know those cases, then we should do well on this FRQ. But I still want to go through and show you guys exactly how to write this and tell you where you can score your points. And by the end of today's presentation, I hope you understand exactly how to write this thing, what it should look like, and do it in a way where you can easily score all the points on the rubric. All right, here we go. So let's go through the SCOTUS comparison so that you know exactly what it is and what to expect. Now, when I say SCOTUS comparison, SCOTUS is an abbreviation for Supreme Court of the United States. So this is the Supreme Court Comparison FRQ. Now, one of the skills for AP Government is to be able to compare Supreme Court cases. You will be presented with a case you are unfamiliar with, right? They're going to give you a scenario. They're going to give you a case. You've never heard of it. I mean, maybe you've heard of it, but unlikely, it's going to be some random case out there. But you're going to be able to, or you're going to be asked to compare it to a case that you are familiar with. All right, so when I say you're familiar with, I mean it's going to be coming from the list of 15. So if you know your 15 Supreme Court cases, then you should score very well on the SCOTUS comparison FRQ. The idea is to learn to compare judicial decisions and make connections to the course curriculum. The judicial branch is very important in our government system, and these decisions that judges make have pretty big consequences for our society. So understanding these decisions and how they connect to the stuff we've been talking about is really important. But SCOTUS comparison is Supreme Court comparison, and all you're going to be asked to do is to take a case you know and compare it to a case you don't know. All right, here we go. Now, whenever we write these writing pieces, I'm big on these checklists. I want you guys to write them in a certain way, and I don't want you to just go for it at the start. I want you to have kind of some structure when you write these things. So I've created these checklists for our writing pieces, and I want to keep them as similar as I can. So each one will be unique, but also the same in a lot of ways. So our checklist is the same for this as compared with other FRQs, with one exception, and I'll get to that in a minute. But as always, read the question and identify the points on the rubric. We've got to make sure we answer the question. Don't just go off on something and that you glazed over the question and you're not directly answering what they're asking you. So yes, I want you to read the question, identify the points on the rubric. As always, I think it's beneficial to make a quick outline you can write right on the test before you start writing. Making that outline will help you settle in your thoughts, and then you'll be able to articulate it with less pressure. As always, I want you to respond in outline format, one bullet point for each part of the question. The argumentative essay is the only one of the four writing pieces where you don't answer in outline format. As always, use the language of the question or parrot the question. Eagles, yes, I know it's annoying, but you got to do this. I want you to restate the prompt in your responses, or use the language of the question in your responses, or parrot the question. Now here's the new one for the SCOTUS comparison. Describe the facts of the case, not just the holding. AP teachers get a report from the College Board, and they tell us where students struggled. With the SCOTUS Comparison FRQ, the majority of students struggled with describing the facts of the case. They did well on talking about the holding, that means the decision, but they were weak on describing the actual facts of the case. So on your 15 Supreme Court case reference guide that I've given you guys, I've made sure I've made it as simple as I can, but I've put a little, statement in there describing the facts of the case. And if you know the facts of each individual case, then you'll do well on this FRQ. All right, let's go through a sample question and response though. All right, Eagles, here's your sample question for the Supreme Court Comparison FRQ. And you're probably looking at it like, whoa, really? Do I have to read this whole thing? Yes, you do. I'm sorry. It is annoying. But for our writing pieces on the AP test, they do give us these really long stimulus questions. So yes, you have to read the whole thing. And while you're reading it, I recommend highlighting different things that stick out to you. Like I see right here, majority opinion, right? I would highlight that and just try to take it all in. I know it's a long stimulus, but deep breath, read the whole thing. So we'll read through this case. Now what it is, this is a case that you're unfamiliar with, right? So it's going to describe to you a case. It's called Greece-Galloway, and it's from the city of Greece in the state of New York. And it'll give you this rundown of what this case is, and then you're going to have to compare it to another case, which I can already see right here is Engel Vital, one of our 15 cases. All right, so let's go through the exercise of answering this. We'll read the whole thing and then we'll create our outline. All right, follow along with me. Monthly town board meetings in Greece, New York, opened with a prayer given by clergy selected from the congregations listed in a local directory. But nearly all the local churches were Christian, so nearly all of the participating prayer givers were too. A lawsuit was filed alleging that the town violated the Constitution by preferring Christians over other religious groups and by sponsoring sectarian prayers. Petitioners sought to limit the town to inclusive and asymical prayers that referred only to a generic God. In the ensuing case, Town of Greece versus Galloway, the Supreme Court held in a 5-4 decision that no constitutional violation existed. Now, if I was marking on this, I would probably underline that right there. That is the holding. No constitutional violation existed. The majority opinion stated that legislative prayer in this situation lent gravity to public business, reminded lawmakers to transcend petty differences to pursue a higher purpose, reflected values that were a part of the nation's heritage, provided a spirit of cooperation, and celebrating the changing of seasons. The audience was primarily lawmakers themselves, and though many bowed their heads during the prayer, they did not solicit similar gestures from the public. It was delivered as a ceremonial portion of the town's meeting. Okay, so as I read that, I'm going, okay, so this is about prayer, and this is going to be similar to Engel Vital, and you have the situation where there's a prayer going on in a local board meeting, and people are saying, hey, that's violating the Establishment Clause, and we're going to sue for this, and the Supreme Court is ruling no constitutional violation existed. All right, so now that we've kind of got this case in our mind, let's answer the question. All right, it's very similar to the other questions. It's a 3-part question, and you want to make sure that you identify if it's an identify question, or in this case, it's an explain question, or a describe question, right? So we're doing the same things that we've done for all of our FRQs. Outline format, identify what the question is asking you. All right, let's go through this. Part A, identify the constitutional clause that is common to both Greece-Galloway and Engel Vital. And Engel Vital, is on our list of 15, and all the cases that are presented in this will be. And you should be familiar with Engel Vital. Now, this is an identify question, right? So if you know your 15 Supreme Court cases and which constitutional clause is attached to what, then the point right here should be very easily scored, right? So what I like to do, and again, you don't have to do it like this, but I like to scribble an outline on the question before I start actually writing it. So identify the constitutional clause. I know that this is about the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. Now, do you have to put First Amendment? No, but I can, so I'm going to, just to bulk up my response. So I will say Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. Would you get the point if you just put First Amendment? Probably not. You'd probably have to say Establishment Clause because it does ask you identify the constitutional clause. If you say freedom of religion in the First Amendment, you might get it. But you know, just write Establishment Clause and you would be just fine in this situation. All right, it's an ID point. That's all it's asking you to do, so we can move on to Part B. Okay, now this is where the SCOTUS Comparison FRQ is a little bit unique to the other FRQs. Part B, I want you to answer in a very specific way. All right, let's read it. Based on the constitutional clause identified in Part A. So based off of the Establishment Clause, right? Explain why the facts of Engel Vital led to a different holding than the holding in Greece Galloway. All right, so on the rubric that they grade you on, there's 2 points here, even though it's not clear in how the question is worded. The 2 points are this. They want to know if you know the facts of the cases, and specifically the facts of Engel Vital, right? And they want you to be able to explain why it was a different holding in this situation. Sometimes they give you a prompt where the holding is the same, but in this case, they're giving you a question where the holding is different, right? Because in this one, no constitutional violation existed, whereas in Engel Vital, there was a constitutional violation. The Establishment Clause was, you know, it was found to be a violation. So they want you to be able to describe the facts of the case and then explain why there was a different holding. Now, facts of the case does not mean the holding itself. So we know in Engel Vital that it was ruled that there was a breach of the Establishment Clause. But the facts of the case are describing what happened. And in Engel Vital, it was the prayer in public school, right? So you got to be able to explain the facts of the case. So how I want you to write Part B is this. I want you to explain the facts of both cases, Engel Vital and Greece Galloway. Then I want you to answer the question as to why there was a different holding. So again, explain the facts of Engel Vital, explain the facts of Greece Galloway, excuse me, and then explain why there was a different holding. Okay, let's write on my outline how we're going to do that. Excuse me. So Engel Vital, very simple. In this case, we know students were in a public school and they're being compelled to pray in a morning prayer. So that tells the grader, yeah, we know what Engel Vital was about. Greece Galloway should be easy because it's right here. You don't have to do much except just explain what's going on in the case you just read. So, facts of the case for Greece Galloway, there's a prayer given in a monthly board meeting, and the lawsuit alleges priority given to Christians. So in our response, I'd articulate this, and then I've got to explain why there was a different holding between the cases, right? So for this, the different holding was schools are required, right? Thus, the prayer is now being forced upon the students versus, in this case, ceremonial and not required by the public. Now, this is the hardest point to score, but if you just stick to this outline of facts of one case, facts of the other case, and then explain why, you're good to go. So in this, I recognize that it was a ceremonial portion of the town meeting, and they did not solicit similar gestures by the public. So it was not required by the public. Whereas in Engel Vital, schools required, so the prayer thus was required. All right, so that's my outline, and we'll articulate it later when we show a sample response. Part C, describe an action that members of the public who disagree with the holding in Greece Galloway could take to limit its impact. Okay, so what can the public do if they don't like what the court has done here? And this goes back to understanding our checks and balances, right? You can protest the prayer, right? We're using our linkage institutions now, or you can vote for council members who want to abolish the tradition. Okay, so I've broken it down. We've created our outline. Now we just have to articulate it in our response. This really is the hard part. If we get our outline down and we've read the question, then the rest of it should be smooth sailing. All right, let's go through the next part of writing this SCOTUS Comparison FRQ. Now, if you were confused at all while I was talking when we were creating our outline, hopefully showing you how the response is written out in this sample question will help you. So, SCOTUS Comparison FRQ Part 1A. Identify the constitutional clause that is common to both Greece-Galloway and Engel-Vital. Again, it's an identify question, so it should be pretty straightforward as long as you know your 15 cases, right? Now, I'm big on checklists, so similar checklist to the other FRQs. You want to parrot the question and then answer the question, right? So, parrot the question. The constitutional clause that is common to both Greece-Galloway and Engel-Vital is, I'm going to answer the question, the Establishment Clause within the First Amendment. Straightforward, we're done. And again, if you know the clauses attached to each one of your cases, then this is an easy point to score. And once again, did I have to write within the First Amendment? No, but I do know that it's in the First Amendment, so adding it just makes my response a lot stronger. All right, let's go through Part B. Now, I will admit, Eagles, this is one of the hardest points to score on your AP exam, but if you just write it how I ask you to in this presentation right here, you'll do fine. You'll score both points on the rubric. Okay, so here we go. Based on the constitutional clause identified in Part A, explain why the facts of Engel-Vital led to a different holding than in Greece-Galloway. Okay, now, again, there are 2 points on the rubric. Number 1, they want to see if you know the facts of the case. Number 2, they want to see if you can explain why there was a different holding. Now, in this case, there was a different holding, right? Galloway said there was no violation of the Constitution. In Engel-Vital, there was a violation of the Establishment Clause, right? Some cases you get, there'll be a similar holding. But in this one, there's a different holding. All right, so to score both points on the rubric, we need to describe the facts of the case and then explain why there was a difference in the holding. Okay, here we go. First, facts of the case. In Greece-Galloway, a prayer was given by local clergy in monthly town board meetings. A lawsuit was filed alleging the town violated the Constitution by preferring Christians over other religions. In Engel-Vital, students in a public school were being forced to participate in a morning prayer. The Supreme Court ruled that this violated the division between church and state. So in a couple sentences, I have described the facts of both cases. I didn't really talk about the holding. I did mention church and state here, but I didn't talk about a breach of the Establishment Clause. That's not what they're asking you. They want to know the details of the case, right? So to describe the facts of the case, give a brief, sentence or two description of both cases. If you can do that, you scored the first point. Now we want to score the second point. We want to explain why the holding was different. To do that, we just go through our normal response, right? Parrot the question. Based on the Establishment Clause, the facts of Engel-Vital led to a different holding in Greece-Galloway because, right, now we answer the question. Because in Engel-Vital, the students were required to attend public school, which was a government entity, thus being forced to pray and a breach of the Establishment Clause. Whereas in Greece-Galloway, the prayer was viewed as ceremonial and the public was not required to participate, thus no violation of the Establishment Clause. I made sure I answered the question. It says based on the constitutional clause identified in Part A, so I got to make sure I reference the Establishment Clause in my response, right? Explain why there was a different holding. And where I scored the point here is students are required to pray in Engel-Vital, but in Greece-Galloway, the public was not required. So that is where I scored the point as to why there was a difference in the holding. Now, just a side note, I have had students break down Part B and they go 1B1 and then they describe the facts of Greece-Galloway, and then they go 1B2 and they describe the facts of Engel-Vital, and then they go 1B3 and then they explain why the holding was different, and they break it up rather than just one big paragraph. That is a really good way to do it. However, you're not required to break it up that way, although if you want to, it's a great way to make sure you get all the points on this question. But again, you're not required to. All I want you to do is describe the facts of the case and then answer the question and explain why there was a difference in the holding. All right, Part C. I actually think Part C is easier than Part B. Here we go. Describe an action that members of the public who disagree with the holding in Greece-Galloway could take to limit its impact. All right, so we're back to linkage institutions and what the public can do about it and checks and balances. So really, it's a straightforward question. As always, we parrot the question and then answer the question. Parrot the question. One action that members of the public who disagree with the holding in Greece-Galloway could take to limit its impact is, now we got to answer the question, use their First Amendment rights to lawfully protest the prayer. If enough people did not participate in the prayer, town council members may decide to abolish the tradition. Another action the public could take would be to vote for council members who would prefer to abolish the tradition of the prayer. All right, now I want to point out a couple things I did here. When I answered the question, I said First Amendment rights to lawfully protest the prayer. Now, if I were to have stopped right there, because it's a described point, they may not have given it to me. I mean, they probably would have, but I really want to make sure I close the loop and explain what would happen. So I go on, I articulate my response in more detail. If enough people did not participate in the prayer, town council members may decide to abolish their tradition. So I didn't just stop with protest the prayer. I explained why protesting the prayer would lead to a change. So yeah, a lot of people would stop here, but don't stop there. It's a described point. You have to close the loop. You have to take it full circle. Why would protesting the prayer lead to a change? And then I described it. But hold on, I did something else. Hopefully you recognized it. I used the spare tire. Or in other words, I gave a second example to bulk up my response. Another action the public could take would be to vote for council members, vote being the key word here, who would prefer to abolish the tradition of the prayer. Remember, Eagles, you're not marked down for things that you get wrong. You're only given points for things you get right. So if you have time or a second idea, throw it in there. It's the spare tire. It won't hurt you. It can only help you. So in this case, I threw it in there as a second response. Okay, so there's Part C of the SCOTUS comparison. And again, if you just follow the checklist on each of the three parts, you'll be just fine.